everybody, and today we're talking about Hellboy Omnibus Volume 3. This is Hellboy, The Wild Hunt. Everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent, and today we are reviewing Hellboy Omnibus Volume 3, The Wild Hunt. This is by Mike Mignola and Duncan Fegredo. Now, if you've been watching our little Hellboy miniseries or whatever list of videos so far, I've been reading the old trade paperbacks that are over here, right? These little single issue, like 6-issue trade paperbacks from, I think, when the first Hellboy movie came out. I got to Darkness Calls, which was volume 8 in that series, and that's the first volume collected in here. I had that, and then I never collected past that. And it had been so many years since they wrapped up Hellboy's story or whatever that I actually was interested in it, that I could not find those older ones and didn't want to pay the premium. So I have the next 2 volumes of the Omnibus. So there's 4 of them, and this is volume 3, and I read volume 4 also. So this one is a big boy. Holy shit. Hellboy Omnibus Volume 3, The Wild Hunt, contains 3 different trade paperbacks. The Wild Hunt, or Darkness Calls, The Wild Hunt, and the trade paperback called The Storm and the Fury. So The Storm was actually a little Hellboy miniseries, 1 through 3, and I think the Fury was also 3 issues. That was collected, both those were collected into one trade paperback. So yeah, this would be volume 8, 9, and 10 of the original trades, right? So that's why this puppy is so big. It is 515 pages, basically, this entire story. It's massive. And it's awesome. God, I loved reading this. I loved reading this. And I loved reading this because this is the culmination of all the little hints and things that Mike Mignola has been dropping in the Hellboy stories that we've been talking about. It's callbacks to, Box Full of Evil, Iron Shoes, babies getting replaced with changelings from fairies, things from Conqueror Worm or Wake the Devil. All that is coming together in a head in this volume. So that's why I was looking yesterday afternoon thinking like, hey, I can read a new book. I finished Thor. What do I want to read? What do I want to jump into? Do I want to start a new series for the channel or whatever? I was like, well, I still have some I can finish. And I looked, I was like, I only have 2 more of Hellboy, so let me finish reading those. And I'm so glad I did. I basically read this and Omnibus Volume 4, which isn't that big. But I read that in an afternoon, and that was a phenomenal, phenomenal time to read all those. So anyway, what's different about this one is that you don't have Mike Mignola artwork here. This has Duncan Fegredo, and he's basically like almost an independent comic book artist. He's not somebody who I knew when it was announced, because I remember reading, I think while I was reading one of these older issues, that they announced that, Mike Mignola was going to be taken, not taken off. He was taking himself off of some Hellboy stuff to focus on the writing and let somebody else do the art because it wasn't coming out as timely as he wanted to, and Duncan Fegredo was going to be that artist. So he was a name, I don't know if I'd known him beforehand, and I was reading a profile of him on the Comics Journal yesterday afternoon, and he'd done a bunch of indie stuff, lots of Vertigo work, things like that before he jumped on here, and boy does he fucking kick ass on here. What's interesting though is that looking at his other artwork, he's definitely trying to fit in with Mike Mignola's style, and I would describe his style in here as Mignola-esque. He's definitely has a vibe. It's definitely different from Mignola. It's a little more complicated, a little more detailed than Mignola does in the prior volumes or even in the next volume. So there's definitely a difference, but I loved it. There's something about what's in here that feels like Hellboy. It feels like Mignola, but it also feels significantly different. I think also in the last collection, The Storm and the Fury, when he's drawing this character, it's not Liz, Alice, and some of the other faces, you can tell that the human faces are more Duncans than they are Mignolas, while Hellboy starts off a little further away from Mignola in the first volume. I don't know if you can see that here. And then as he closes out this last miniseries, he starts to pull back a little bit on the detail for Hellboy, and it feels a little bit more Mignola-esque. Let me find one of these, like this panel right here, feels a little bit more Mignola-esque because he's pulling back on the detail. You're getting more of an exaggerated form sometimes with things like that. And that Comics Journal interview was really interesting to read because he was talking about how a lot of this probably feels like Mignola to me because Mignola was giving him like thumbnails, or not thumbnails, but thumbnail layouts, like little how he wanted the story to feel, because the storytelling here is consistent with other volumes in the Hellboy world. So everything kind of flows. The panel layouts, he's got the little inset panels in here of details the way that Mignola did, of like a flower or a skull. I'm trying to find one particular example that I can't find. But they are there more so in the Darkness Call storyline, and then once we get to the Wild Hunt and the Storm and the Fury, when the storyline really takes off, they kind of disappear. But that's fine because you're really more interested in the story. And so what this story is basically a culmination of Hellboy's prophecy, right? Hellboy, his real name is Aung Un Rama, if I said that correctly, and he's a demon from hell that was summoned by Rasputin, and he's supposed to free. What's the dragon, right? These 7 beasts of creatures of up in the sky in an alternate dimension that are supposed to come down and destroy the world, and at the same time he's supposed to grow his horns and become the king of hell and the ruler of everything. And this is something that Hellboy doesn't want, right? So he's trying his whole life to be a good person and not to be this thing. This story ties that in with all the other stories in the past and also the Excalibur legend. They find a way to make Hellboy involved with King Arthur and involved with Excalibur, and I won't give it away. I felt that was interesting. And when I was reading it for the first time, I really sat up in my chair and was like, whoa, this is different. I kind of like this. It doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. It feels organic in a weird way. And that's maybe because like these Hellboy stories are more about tone and feeling than they are about story and plot. And they just kind of moved that along here in this big omnibus. So it was pretty awesome. There's Aung Un Rama in his final form with the horns and the wings and everything and the crown. So yeah, it's cool. Definitely dug it. And it was surprising to me too how this actually wrapped up that whole prophecy storyline. And I was like, well, where do we go from here with Hellboy in Hell? How does that work out? And this is kind of, this is really like the ending for the Hellboy character here in Volume 3. And I would call Omnibus Volume 4, Hellboy in Hell, the epilogue, so to speak. So I would definitely check this out. It's kind of amazing to me that Mignola was able to tell 3 awesome stories in here with Darkness Calls, The Wild Hunt, and The Storm and the Fury, and make them all kind of flow together in one volume the way that it's collected. I think is really interesting. Darkness Calls is my least favorite of the 3 because it is all basically set up. There's nothing in Darkness Calls in those 6 issues that resolve themselves. It's all set up for what happens in the Wild Hunt and what happens in the Storm and the Fury. So that's pretty much it. My favorite of all 3 of these trade paperbacks would be the Wild Hunt. It's 8 issues long. It's awesome. That's where a lot of the revelations come in, and the Storm and the Fury is kind of the resolution to all those problems that were set up in the Wild Hunt storyline. So I understand why this omnibus is called the Wild Hunt. It's pretty cool. It's also interesting to read this and then revisit the 2019 Hellboy film with David Harbour. I started watching that last night. I didn't finish it. It's still a bad movie, but I can see where they were pulling from because at the time seeing that movie, I had not read this at all. And that movie is actually an adaptation of, I think the last two stories in here, it starts off pretty much like at the beginning of the Wild Hunt, introducing those hunting characters, the giants and things like that, and then goes into the thing with Alice and the Blood Queen. So, and all that's wrapped up in here, and all that's wrapped up in that film. And they try and introduce all these different characters, and that film also kind of doesn't succeed because they're trying to do Hellboy's big prophecy, his big ending, his big storyline, at the same time as a reboot while introducing his world and just setting things in. So now they're trying to cram in what the BPRD is, cramming in Professor Broom, his origin story is crammed in there. There's some other adventures that are also crammed in there. And I realized that film didn't work because it was bad. I mean, that was part of it. It wasn't very good. Like, David Harbour's Hellboy is way different than anything you could read and hear. That's for sure. He's too childish. He's too much, basically. And the fact that they're cramming so much story in there also doesn't help. So it's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't, and then damned because he did. So that's kind of my final thoughts on that film. I'll probably go and finish it out just to see the last half of it or something like that. But it was interesting to have read this and then start that in the same day and be like, oh, that's what they were trying to do and they failed so spectacularly at. And seeing how awesome this volume is and how terrible that film is, it's just a stark contrast. So if you've seen that movie and you heard me say that that movie's based on this, do not think that they are one and the same. This is a fantastic storyline. I encourage everybody to read this. Honestly, there's so much stuff in here. There's seeds for like BPRD because you have Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman in here. I'm sure their storyline is also involved in later volumes of that book because that has way more issues than Hellboy. There's also callbacks to, I guess, stories that were told later. This was published in like 08, 09, something like that, and into 2014, something like that. Like, it took a long time, I believe, for them to do all these. Maybe I'm thinking of Hellboy in Hell wrapping up. But anyway, there's also a lot of callbacks to like Hellboy's past of stories that haven't been told yet. Oh, I met you in 1952, 1956, like things like that, when there are now volumes of new published Hellboy stories that take place in those timelines. So if I read those, they'll probably harken back to this if you do like a big read-through chronologically rather than how publishing order as we're doing. So anyways, whole lot of fun. Really, really love this volume. I can't believe I loved it so much. I blew through it in a day. 500 pages. Hellboy. The Wild Hunt. Duncan Fegredo, Mike Mignola. Fantastic volume. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of this volume, and we will see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.